All right. Good evening once again. Today we're looking at monetary policy and inflation. Colleagues, I hope you remember what monetary policy is. Can someone give it a shoot? What is monetary policy? Mr. Chiza, Mr. Ernest. Okay, so monetary policy, this is how the central bank influences the economy through the money supply. All right. Let's put that there. Just want to type it out here. Let's see. A central bank. In this case, for Zambia, our central bank is the Bank of Zambia. Influences the economy through the money supply. Right. So there are three tools that the central bank uses to impart this monetary policy. Do we remember the tools, Mr. Ernest? Okay. Now, I was meaning in terms of remember the discount rate, required reserve ratio, and the open market. Yes, yes, yes. So the tools they use first is the required reserve ratio. This is the amount of money the bank keeps whenever you deposit money into the bank. All right. If the required reserve ratio, for example, is 10%, and you go to your bank and you deposit a 1,000, it means 10% of 1,000, that is 100 kwacha. So it means the bank is going to keep 100 kwacha. Then the remaining 900, it can loan it out. All right. So that's the required reserve ratio, the percentage of the customer's money that the bank has to keep. That's the first two. Are we okay with that? Well, we're looking at monetary policy here first. Then we're going to see its relationship with inflation. But here first, we're still focusing on the monetary policy part first. Okay. Yeah. Essentially, the bank keeps whenever you deposit money. Second tool, anybody to give it a shot? The second tool, Oh, I actually even mentioned them earlier on. The discount rate, this is the interest rate central bank charges the commercial banks. All right, remember the commercial banks bank with the central bank, all right, and they can also get loans from the central bank. So the central bank charges them an interest rate, and that's called the discount rate. And the third one is open market operations, where this is where the central bank either buys or sells financial securities. These financial securities can be shares, bonds, all right? Open market operations. This is when the central bank buys or sells financial securities, e.g., shares. Bonds. So the graph which helps us illustrate this is the money market graph, all right? On our y-axis, we have the interest rate. And on our x-axis, we have the quantity of money, right? So first we have our downward sloping money demand curve, DM, right? There is an inverse relationship between the quantity of money demanded and the interest rates, right? At high interest rates, it's expensive to borrow, right? So with the high interest rates, few people and few banks are borrowing and there's less spending. Thus, the quantity of money is low, right? Another way to think of it, at high interest rates, again, this is from the saver's point of view. At high interest rates, right? If you do not invest your money into interest earning assets, the opportunity cost, which is the interest that you're going to lose, is high. So people would rather save more when interest rates are high. All right. Then if interest rates are low, people would rather spend more because the opportunity cost, which is the interest that you lose, is low. So you wouldn't want to spend, you didn't want to save your money. All right. So those are two ways you can look at it. Low interest rates from the saver's point of view, there's no point in saving that money because the interest that you lose won't be that much. So you'd rather keep your money. All right. Then from the spender's perspective, at low interest rates means the cost of borrowing is low, meaning firms, businesses and customer and consumers can borrow more money. Thus the quantity of money increases. Now we're okay with that, colleagues? Any questions before we go further? Okay, then we have the money supply graph, which is straight. This is not affected by the interest rates. Remember, it's the central bank that prints the money. So the money supply is not affected by any of the interest rates. All right, that's why it is upward sloping like this. All right, this graph is going to show us what happens when the central bank exercises expansionary monetary policy. This is where they want to increase the money supply so that they can stimulate more spending, which can help increase our real GDP output. All right. Then, in terms when there's, especially when there's high inflation, the central bank, what it does, it decreases the money supply, right, making it more expensive to borrow for firms and businesses, and thus reducing spending. Less people are spending means goods are staying on the shelves there. Firms have to actually cut down on production because less people are spending. So even those goods that are staying on the shelf, eventually the price has to go down. All right. And another important concept we have to understand is the quantity theory of money. Right. It's represented as this: M times V equals P times Q. So what this equation is telling us is that if, or first let me explain each of the letters. M is the money supply, all right? The money which is in circulation, all right? V is the velocity of money, meaning how much money is spent, right? Velocity of money. So we're just talking about money being spent, all right? P is the price. Q is the output. In this case, the real GDP output. So what this equation is telling us that if you hold the velocity of money constant and the output constant, right, an increase in the money supply is going to cause an increase in prices, which means inflation. You have inflation. All right. So it's telling us that inflation is directly related to the money supply. If you hold these two constants, I mean, these two variables constant, the velocity of money and the output, all right, then the inflation is directly proportional to the money supply. Are we okay with that, colleagues? Inflation is directly proportional to the money supply. All right. Inflation directly proportional to money supply. Any questions? Now, V is the velocity of money, meaning how much money is being spent within the economy. P, or let me actually even write them down here. M, money supply, right? If you increase the money supply, meaning there's more money in the economy, meaning even there will be more spending in the economy, right? So the velocity of money also increases. And when there's a lot of money in the economy, that means that too much money is chasing little goods. All right. Demand is actually exceeding supply. So People who are selling goods, since they do not want to run out of the goods, since people are excessively buying the goods, what do? They increase the price level. All right. And once they increase the price level, that's an incentive for the firms to produce more. Have we got that sequence? You increase the money supply, a lot of people have got money in the economy, so meaning there's more spending, so even the velocity of money increases. When there's a lot of spending in the economy, right? The prices of goods go up, all right? Prices of goods go up. When the prices of goods go up, remember from the law of supply, when price increases, firms want to produce more because they can make more money. So output is going to increase. Have we got that sequence? Uh-huh. Now, if we hold the velocity of money constant and the output constant, if you increase the money supply, prices are going to go up. And when you know inflation is the increase of prices. So this is what this uh, equation is telling us, that if you hold these two variables constant, inflation is directly related to the money supply. So that's why when the central bank sees that there's high inflation within the economy, they know that they have to reduce spending. All right. They reduce expenditure, aggregate demand goes down. Because the inflation we're talking about here is demand pull inflation. All right. The inflation that occurs when demand increases, but there are few goods to satisfy that demand. So people just have to increase the prices. All right. Yes. So we're going to see now with the graphs how expansionary fiscal policy, what happens, and when there's a contractionary fiscal policy. So we're going to first have to also use the aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph so that we can also see the whole picture. Right, so in our aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph, on our y-axis, we have price level. All right, then on our y-axis, we have real GDP output. I mean, on our x-axis, real GDP output. We've got our downward sloping aggregate demand curve, aggregate demand, total expenditure on goods or services, excuse me, or the demand of goods and services that are produced within a country. But my favorite is the total expenditure on goods and services. Downward sloping, right? We have our aggregate supply curve, upward sloping, total supply of goods and services within the economy. This is our short run aggregate supply. Colleagues, do we remember what the short run is? What the short run are in macro, what the short run and the long run are? Short run is when wages are fixed, then the long run when wages aren't fixed. fixed. All right. Then we have our long run aggregate supply curve, which is not affected by price level. All right. This long run aggregate supply curve shows the real GDP output at full employment. Does anyone remember what full employment means? When we are utilizing our resources efficiently, the number one source which we mostly concentrate on is labor. All right. We've also got capital, we've also got land. So whenever you are utilizing those resources efficiently, that's what we call full employment. All right. So now we're going to see in a situation where the central bank has to employ an expansionary monetary policy. All right. That situation is when the economy is undergoing a recession. All right. We have a recessionary gap. So we say our AD curve, we'll put it here. All right. So a recessionary gap in this graph is represented where the current output, if we're going to say Q1, is less than the real GDP output at full employment. All right. Then in real life, how you spot a recessionary gap? Just go to, like for example, Zambia's GDP. You'll be given a graph, and you're going to see the graph going like this, up, down, up, down. Now, the points where you can see a decline, all right, in the real GDP, all right, wherever there's a decline in the real GDP, then you're experiencing a recessionary gap, all right? Yes. So, what the central bank can do is first, they can increase the money supply, all right? So, when they increase the money supply, all right, these are the things that can happen, right? Number one, the required reserve ratio can be lowered. All right. Once the central bank increases the money supply, the required reserve ratio is lowered, meaning banks have to keep less of your money and they can loan out more of your money. All right. For example, I gave an example earlier on, if the required reserve ratio is 10%, you deposit a 1,000, the bank keeps 100, the other 900 they can loan out. Right? If the bank let's say they reduce the required reserve ratio to 2% from 10%, right? They reduce it to 2%, right? Meaning when you deposit that 1,000, what is 2% of 1,000? 0.02 times 1,000, what do we get? Should be 20 kwacha, if I'm not mistaken. The bank keeps just the 20 kwacha, right? And the remaining 980, they can loan it out. All right. Are we okay with that, colleagues? The central bank increases the money supply, as the required reserve ratio goes down, meaning banks get to keep less of your money and they can loan out more of your money. All right. The other thing that can go down too is the discount rate. All right. The central bank reduces the interest rate. It means commercial banks can borrow more from the central bank. When they borrow more, they can loan out more money. All right. so that there's a lot of spending within the economy. The third thing that can happen, the central bank can buy financial securities, right? With expansionary monetary policy, the central bank is buying these financial securities. They buy these securities and they're pumping in money into circulation through the commercial banks, right? So with expansionary monetary policy, the required reserve ratio, which I'll just put here as RRR, goes down. The discount rate also goes down, DR, and the central bank buys financial securities. So now let's see this on the graph. Increase in money supply, this money supply curve will shift to the right, right? It shifts to the right. So what happens? Quantity of money increases, then the interest rate goes down, meaning the cost of borrowing is low. So since the cost of borrowing is low, it means businesses, people, all right, can borrow more, all right? And when we borrow more, we spend more. If a business borrows money from the bank, it's using it to invest in new projects, new buildings, new facilities. So as they are investing in those things, all right, people are also getting employed, all right, to undertake those projects. People are getting employed. And as those people are getting employed, they're also earning money. So it means a lot of people are earning money, meaning a lot of spending is going to go on through the economy. So when we translate this to our aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph, if we remember the shifters of aggregate demand, it's an increase in the shifters are consumption spending by us, the consumers, investment spending by the businesses, government spending by government, and net exports. So any increase in any of these four variables, aggregate demand increases, right? So when the central bank increases the money supply, more borrowing by firms and consumers. So an increase in consumption spending, since a lot of people are borrowing, so they're spending more. An increase in investment spending, businesses are investing in new projects, people are getting hired, people are getting income, more spending. Thus, our aggregate demand curve is going to shift, right? And bring us back at equilibrium, all right? Bring us back at equilibrium. Any questions? That's on expansionary monetary policy. This is usually implemented, especially when there is a recession in the economy, right? And then we want to want our output to increase, so want also stimulate spending. Because remember, in the short run, as we saw with this quantity theory of money, right? As the money supply increases, more spending increases, the price level increases, output increases. This means GDP output will increase. So that's even better for the economy. But that's just in the short run because remember, as a country, there is a limit to where we cannot produce any more. All right. So more money that comes into circulation is just going to lead to more inflation. All right. Any questions before we go to the contractionary fiscal policy? Mm-hmm. Mm, yes. Yes. You don't need to draw these graphs, right? But yeah, at least you have to be able to know how the things flow. Oh, and there's one more graph I forgot, the Phillips curve. Yes, any questions as I'm just putting the Phillips curve here. This tells us there's an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. Okay, also here again, you've got the long run Phillips curve. This represents the natural rate of unemployment. All right, this is basically when everybody who needs a job has a job. All right, this can also be equated to also full employment, because at full employment, unemployment is very low. All right, everybody who needs a job has a job. The only type of unemployment that is going on in the economy is frictional and structural unemployment. And I hope we remember these, what frictional and structural unemployment are. Can anybody give us a reminder? So a recessionary gap, how it is shown in the Phillips curve, we just transverse this dot to somewhere here. Okay, here. Under a recessionary gap, the inflation rate is low, right? And unemployment is high, right? So when the central bank has done the expansionary monetary policy, when aggregate demand increases, what happens is we have a movement of this point on the Phillips curve, point A to point B, right? So what it's telling us, okay, as we can see, when the aggregate demand shifted, we saw that price level rose. In our case, in our Phillips curve, here we say the inflation rate has gone up. All right. This is the movement from point A to B. Inflation rate goes up, and then unemployment reduces. Okay. Unemployment reduces. Right. We're back at the natural rate of unemployment. All right. Any questions before we see when the central bank implements a contractionary fiscal policy? This is when they see inflation is too high in the economy. All right, inflation is too high. We need to reduce the inflation in the economy. Okay, so with the contractionary fiscal policy, This is where the central bank reduces the money supply. This is what happens. The required reserve ratio increases, meaning the banks have to keep more of the money that people deposit and loan out less. Okay, as you said, if, for example, if the required reserve ratio increased from 10% to 90%, meaning if you deposit that 1,000 in your bank, the bank gets to keep 900 kwacha, and then it can only loan out 100 kwacha. All right. Two, then they can increase the discount rate, right? Meaning the cost of borrowing becomes expensive for the commercial banks, right? So they won't be going to the central bank to borrow a lot. And when they don't go to borrow a lot from the central bank, it means they don't have a lot to also offer to their customers. If you want to borrow money from them, they'll actually even charge you a high interest rate. All right. Or another way to look at it, commercial banks would rather leave their money in the central bank because it's also earning them interest. Right. Because remember, the commercial banks bank with the central bank and they also earn interest. All right. So if the discount rate goes up, right, if that commercial bank wants to remove money, then it means that when it's borrowing that money, also it's going to charge a high interest rate. All right. Then under open market operations, this is when the central bank sells financial securities, especially to commercial banks. The commercial banks are buying these financial securities. The central bank is pulling out money from circulation. So financial securities. Right. So let's see now this with the graphs.